Hi, I'm Amy and this is A-Star Reads, and I'm finally getting to my November wrap-up. It only took me, what, a week and a half? I actually accomplished a ton of books because I was doing two big readathons. I was doing IndigAThon and I was doing Believathon. And of course I thought I needed individual books for all the prompts. I had way more books on my list than I actually read. But I read 22 books last month. And granted, a lot of them were middle grade and children's books, but that still was a lot for me. So I'd like to go through the statistics really fast because a lot of people do their statistics and I just really enjoy that part of the video, so I'm going to add mine here. I read 21 full books, 1 DNF, and I partially read a book of poetry. My average rating was 3.72, which isn't bad. 1 5-star book, 11 books in the 4-star range, 7 books in the 3-star range, 2 books in the 2-star range, and then 1 DNF. That was a total of 3,998 pages. That's a lot for me, I think, so it was a bit rough. I'm gonna try and not do that many books in the future because then I don't have time for other things like life and making and editing videos. And so it was a little hectic in the last week trying to get everything ready for December because I feel like I was trying to catch up. I spent a lot of time last month reading, which is great. I love reading. But there's, you know, other parts of life that we have to do. I'm just not that fast of a reader. If you've seen my mid-month wrap-up, you'll know what parts of the Believathon I have finished and where I still need to go. But I'll put that map up here of where I ended, and I'm gonna tell you how I finished up the rest of my prompts. So after picking up the backpack, I went down into the lounge because I hadn't really checked out that room yet. There was a fireplace that had a beautiful fire in it, and I could kind of see something glinting off the mantelpiece. So I went over and I saw a hand mirror. And in that hand mirror, all of a sudden words appeared that said, "Read a book with a beautiful cover." And I thought, all right, next clue. So I did. I read In the Footsteps of Crazy Horse by John Marshall III. If you want to know a little bit more about the details, I definitely talked about this a lot in my 48-hour readathon, and I will link that above and down below. During the time I gave it a 3-star, but on further reflection and considering the other books I read this month, I actually would probably give it a 2.75. So the book is about a young boy who's Lakota mixed, and because he's mixed, he has very light skin and light hair, and he gets made fun of at school a lot because if they're white kids, they're like, well, you're not white. If they're native kids, they're like, well, you're not native. And so they give him a hard time. And he is talking to his grandfather about this, and his grandfather's like, well, you know, Crazy Horse was light-skinned. And so in order to help this young boy identify more with his heritage, his grandfather decides to take him on a journey where they go to all the really important places in Crazy Horse's life. So as much as I really wanted to like this story and enjoyed learning history, I wasn't crazy about the way that the stories were told in this, and that's probably where I had difficulty because I really didn't connect to the characters that much until like halfway into the story, because the second half of the story was much better than the first half for me. The stories were told in a very spatial way in the sense that he was describing a lot of things based off direction, like north, south, east, west, left, right, up, down. I need a little more description than that, and I also like a little more human involvement in the stories, and I feel like for me that was a little lacking. It's unfair to talk about other people's storytelling in that way, but we all have preferences, right? Ultimately though, I really liked learning the history of Crazy Horse, and I think that this is a valuable book. I think a lot of people will enjoy it and get a lot out of it. If I compare it to some of the other books I read that were very historical, say like Tim Tingle's books, I feel like you can get the history in a way that I can connect to a little more. So after throwing the hand mirror in my backpack, I hear this weird bubbling sound, and I kind of start searching for it and find a potions room, which I'm super fascinated by because, I mean, it's a potions room. How cool is that? But I know I'm looking for clues, so I try not to get too distracted. And I see this really cool bottle with like light flashing in it. It's like a flash of lightning or something like that. I just can't imagine how somebody would have collected that, but really cool. And I was like, well, how do I collect this clue? And all of a sudden, I had this feeling that I needed to read a book about folk tales. So I thought, I know just the book. So I read Amazonia by Daniel Munduruku, and it's a collection of indigenous tales from the Amazon. I gave it 3.25 stars. There were some stories that I really liked, and my favorite one was probably the one that was, I think, The Boy Who Went Craw Craw Craw, which I actually thought was really cute. There were some other ones that I really enjoyed as well, and then some of them kind of went from one subject to another subject to another subject, and you couldn't quite figure out where this story was gonna go. The illustrations were done by Nikolai Popov, and he's actually a Russian artist, it sounds like. The illustrations in the book were probably my favorite part, to be honest, because they were beautiful. They were really, really nicely done. So I feel like I'm finally starting to get somewhere. And I run into the dining room and I see this shadow on the floor. And the shadow actually goes into like a movie theater in this big, beautiful mansion. I'm like, wow, they're pretty lucky people. And while I'm in there, it's like a trap, because all of a sudden a chain comes and grabs my arm and I scream at the top of my lungs, and the shadow kind of whispers to me, in order to collect these 2 clues, you need to read a book with colorful characters that was published in 2020. And I thought, I know the perfect book for this one as well. This is all coming together. This is fantastic. So I ended up picking The Barren Grounds by David Alexander Robertson, and I loved it. He got a 4.75 for this book from me. It's about these 2 characters, Morgan and Eli, and they're put in the foster system. Morgan has been passed around from one foster family to the next, so she is really struggling with trying to accept that this couple wants to do right by her. And in general, she doesn't make friends easily. She struggles a lot in social settings, and she really just is always on the defense. Eli's an artist, and at one point he draws this picture. It kind of comes to him. He doesn't even really think about it when he's drawing it, and it's like this winter setting. And when him and Morgan are up in the attic, which is her like safe space, they're kind of trying to decorate the attic, and he puts the poster up on the wall and staples it in, and all of a sudden snow starts coming out of the poster. So it opens up a world to another portal, and the 2 go in. And they meet Ochek, and Ochek is the word for fisher. I kind of think of them like ferrets. They look a lot like ferrets, but they're brown, they're dark brown. And Ochek is the only remaining hunter for his village of Misewa. At one point, a man came to the village, and everybody accepted him in. He ended up stealing the migratory birds that changed the seasons, helped the seasons change. After that, winter stayed forever, and food was scarce, and Ochek's trying to provide for this village, but everybody's starting to starve, and it's really a dire situation. Ochek and Morgan and Eli go on an adventure to try and find this human that stole the migratory birds. And they meet up with this adorable squirrel. I can't remember her name right now. I loved the story. I really love David Alexander Robertson's writing style. I think that might have been one of my favorite parts of this, because there were definitely moments where it was a little slow moving, and which is why I didn't give it a full 5 stars, but his writing style made up for so much of it. And I really liked Morgan a lot, the main character. And you know, all the characters were really endearing, which is why I figured it was perfect for a colorful cast of characters. And then also this book came out in September of 2020, so that's another reason why it fulfills these prompts. And I did have to use this book for 2 prompts, because there was no way I was gonna make it to read Race to the Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. It just didn't happen last month. That's my Believathon. I collected all my clues. I still don't yet know where the missing Malefic harem is and who stole it, but hopefully we'll find that out soon. So for IndigAThon, I want to quickly go over my prompts. So for the intersectionality prompt, I ended up reading Love Beyond Body, Space, and Time, and it was edited by Hope Nicolson. I gave this one 4 stars because it is really always hard for me to rate short story collections, because there's always gonna be ones that you're not crazy about, and those that you just absolutely love. Well, I can't say that I disliked any of these. I thought they were all good, and then there were some that were really great. The only section for me that was a bit slow were, there were 3 introductions, like there were 3 separate introduction essays, and that part wasn't my favorite. It was interesting. I learned a lot from those sections, but you know, when you're going into this thinking you're reading sci-fi stories, and then you spend the first third of the book reading not sci-fi stories, it wasn't horrible, but I wish they had spread them out a little more. The second 2 introductions could have been like one in the middle of the book, one at the end of the book. I thought that would have been appropriate. But that's my personal feeling on the matter. These were all sci-fi stories by either LGBTQIA Indigenous authors or Indigenous authors that are allies to the LGBTQIA+ community. And I just thought they did a great job. I really enjoyed all the stories. They were very creative, very unique. They weren't all completely sci-fi. One of my favorite ones was Transitions, and I didn't feel like it was super sci-fi, but it was a great story. The next prompt was New to You, which I chose There by Tommy Orange, and I gave this one 4 stars. So this book took a while to get into. I was struggling with it because the characters are really gritty. I don't know if I like these people. I don't know if I would root for these people. But then it really turned for me, and I started liking it more and more and more, and I really liked it towards the end. It was incredibly compelling. The end is not what you expect at all. I mean, I guess maybe it is once you start reading the storyline. It's a very strong ending. So what it's about is 12 natives. They're urban natives. All these natives have either come from Oakland, California, or have lived in Oakland in the city during part of their life. For whatever reasons, their lives are coming together around the big Oakland powwow. Some of them are working the powwow, some of them are just gonna go to the powwow, some of them are going to do something else at the powwow, but in some way, all their lives start intertwining. And one character, his name is Dene, his whole purpose during the powwow and in preparing for the powwow is trying to get stories of urban natives. He doesn't care if it's a pretty story. He doesn't care if you learn something from the story. He just wants a record of what their lives are like. And that's what I feel this book is like. This book is basically a collection of oral histories for these people that live in these communities. And the stories aren't always pleasant stories. They're just stories about what their life is like being an urban native within the city of Oakland. Once I realized that that was kind of the format it ended up taking, I was better able to kind of look at it from that perspective. Like, I don't have to like these people. I'm just trying to learn about them and to see what their experience is like. And then I actually started liking them more. So I actually really liked this book, especially in the end. I'd say from 1/3 on, it really started becoming very compelling for me. The next prompt is other than the 5 CTs, which means the 5 civilized tribes. And for this one, I decided to use The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, which I finished this month and I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. So you can go ahead and check that out if you're interested in knowing more about that book. Same with my middle grade book. I had another book planned for this one, but it just didn't happen. So I used my favorite middle grade book that I had read this month for that prompt, and it's I Can Make This Promise by Christine Day, because I can't talk about this book enough. I think you should read it. It's a fantastic book. I loved it, and I wanted another opportunity to recommend it. And if you want to know more about that one is also discussed in my mid-month wrap-up. So for my free space, I used Custer Died for Your Sins by Vine Deloria Jr., and I'm not going to talk about it too much right here because I did a whole November nonfiction review of it. So if you want to check that out, I will link that up there and down below. I gave it 3.5 stars, but I felt like my rating was really dependent on the situation. So next was the buddy read, and for this I read Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones, and I read this with Liz from For Booking Out Loud. We had such a good time with this book and talking about it. I really love buddy reads, especially reading books with Liz, because I feel like we had some great conversations, and she really helped me to portion out this book in a way that I think I actually enjoyed it more because we talked about it. There's a lot from this book that I feel like I missed. At this point, I'm giving it a 3.75 stars. I could probably change my rating for this when I reread it, and I do plan on rereading this. I feel like Stephen Graham Jones' writing often needs rereading because he's very clever and he has a lot of details that he puts in there, and I feel like you can miss a lot of the details. So this book is a YA fantasy, and I actually would consider it more magical realism because it feels really realistic, so it kind of feels more magical realism. So the story is about a boy. He's a young boy, and he is part of a family of werewolves, and he ends up living with his aunt and his uncle, and they're taking care of him. He hasn't changed yet, and usually kids change around 13, and he's kind of waiting to change. He wants to see if he's gonna become a werewolf or not. It feels like one giant book made up of a lot of short stories. Each section is its own individual story, which isn't a bad thing, but in some ways, actually, I think this would be better as a series of graphic novels, just based off the content and how it's sectioned up. Hey, it's Editing Amy here to help out poor, struggling Recording Amy. I don't know why I struggled this month to talk about Mongrels. I feel like even when I was reading it with Liz, I really enjoyed it, and I was really into the characters. The discussion with Liz was perfect. The book was enjoyable, but I couldn't really get a grasp on it. And so that's kind of why I'm rating it a little lower at 3.75. I do think that because of how busy my month was, this is one of those books that I need to read again. And I should say that another large part of the reason that I rated it a little lower is that I was pretty disappointed in the ending. The ending kind of had me stumped. We were going in a direction throughout the whole book, and I felt like the ending was not anywhere I had expected it to go, and it was also kind of confusing. So I think the ending is another part where I'd really need to see what exactly is happening there and kind of accept something that happens to one of the other characters that I just was like, I don't know if I like that. So ultimately though, this was such a fun book because I got to buddy read it with Liz, and it's a book that's worth reading. So if you're interested in magical realism, paranormal werewolves, give it a try because it is a very different experience when it comes to reading werewolves, and I think you'll enjoy it. So the next one I want to talk about briefly is the Other Than the US prompt, and I ended up picking up Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq, and I ended up DNFing this book. And it wasn't because it was badly written, it was very well written. It was just that there are certain trigger warnings that are a little more difficult for me, and I can handle them in small amounts. I don't like them, but this one was just a bit much. There was a lot of child sexual abuse, and it was pretty graphic. And so if that's a trigger warning that you really struggle with, I wouldn't recommend picking up this book because I can handle a lot, and that was too much for me. I just was like, I don't really need to put myself through this. I was really enjoying her style. She is very creative. It was all prose. There was definitely certain sections that were very, very poetic. And I think it might be somewhat of a memoir for her, and I know that that can be very cathartic, but it actually ended up being more than I could handle. So finally, I'd like to talk about the non-bookish media, and I picked up We Were Warriors, and this is about a Maori community like in the 1990s. I think this movie was made in 1994, and Maori are indigenous people from New Zealand. I was really interested in this culture. I wanted to learn more, so I picked up this movie, and it was very difficult. They struggled. They were in severe poverty. It was about this family, a father, a mother, and they had, I think, 4 children. So the father struggled with alcoholism. The mother struggled with the father because there was physical abuse, and the children were trying to get along in a community where they have a lot of outside influences, and they're just trying to succeed at something. It wasn't a happy movie if you're looking for something that's uplifting. It is at the very ending, but it's just a difficult watch. There is some severe physical domestic abuse, and if that's a trigger that you struggle with, I would recommend skipping this movie because it's pretty violent. And then there is child sexual abuse, which isn't just implied, so be warned about that as well. But ultimately, I enjoyed this movie. I'm not gonna rate it because I don't rate movies on here, so one less thing I have to worry about. Okay, so that's it for the IndigAthon, and I fulfilled all the prompts for that. I fulfilled all the prompts for Believathon. I feel good about that. So what else did I have in the rest of November? I did read part of one more book. Well, actually 2. So I'm still working on The Witching Hour by Anne Rice, and I've got about 24 hours left, so I'm over halfway finally. Woohoo! I don't know when I will ever finish this book. I would like to think it would be in December, but I am not holding my breath whatsoever. I'm really enjoying The Witching Hour. You know, there's definitely some really interesting things in here. It's very descriptive. Anne Rice is very, very descriptive. And I'm finally starting to like the narrator's voice, and I think it's only because I've just been hearing her for so long, for so many hours, that I can't quite help but kind of, I've just accepted it, I guess. But yeah, I'm continuing to listen to The Witching Hour, and I try to listen to that here and there whenever I get a chance to stop and listen to a book. And then finally, I read part of New Poets of Native Nations. The editor was Heid Erdrich. Heid Erdrich put this together because she really has gotten tired of being the native that you add to your collection of poetry, so you have representation from at least one native author. And also, oftentimes when these native authors are being asked to contribute a poem, they're also asked to contribute a poem that represents being native, like in the stereotypical sense, you know? And so she was kind of tired of that because there's many, many native poets that just write poetry, just like anybody else. And their poetry is special to them and unique, and it doesn't always talk about their relationship to the earth or other very stereotypical themes that are associated with Native American authors or poets. So she wanted just a book of poetry of new, contemporary, upcoming poets that would just be whatever these poets wanted to write about. And so she picked 21 poets, and I did not make it through this whole book because I had so many other books to read, and this was due at the library and somebody else wanted it. I read at least half of it though, and I found some poets that I really, really liked. And I've put their books of poetry on my TBR so that I can read them eventually. Here, I'm gonna mention some of the ones that I really liked. I loved Natalie Diaz, Gwynell Westerman, Laura Daw, Tommy Pico, love Tommy Pico, and Layli Long Soldier. These were the ones that really spoke to me. I think with poetry, it's always kind of like art. You know, when you go to a museum, there's some pieces that are really gonna speak to you more than others, and these were the poets that really spoke to me. At the beginning of each section, you read about each individual author, what native nation they come from, and then she actually tells you what their books of poetry are called so that you can go and seek them out yourself. Then there's at least like 5 to 8 poems for each poet. So I really liked this book, and I will be picking it up again at some point. Anyways, that's it. That was my November, and it was a great month. It was overwhelming, but it was a great month. If you like this video, click the like button now and subscribe so you'll find out how I feel about the books I read in December. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later.